Before I broke off, I ended the second section of this recorded lecture by saying that Villard de Honnecourt's depiction of the dead or the dying Christ on the cross, that this exemplifies a new religious climate of the 13th century, becomes very obvious if you compare to the previous form or the previous conceptualization of the crucified Christ as alive and triumphant and victorious, standing in front of the cross with a golden royal crown on his head, as in this Calvary group from the sculpted wooden Calvary group from the mid-12th century, in the Norwegian stave church in Urnes in Norway. It's just one of several examples, an early example of this kind of motive where Christ is alive and not suffering, and shown in this very powerful, emotional, expressive manner as Villard de Honnecourt does in his drawing. And this new religious climate that I'm speaking of, it implies that you as a worshipper is expected, or the worshippers, the devotees were expected to invest emotionally, spiritually in their worship, and to identify so intensely with the suffering Christ and with the agony of the virgins and with the tribulations of the martyrs, to identify so intensely with this in their own devotional exercises that they felt as if it was they who were suffering in the place of the Virgin and the saints and Christ himself. This is an altarpiece, an Italian altarpiece that shows Saint Francis, who was the founder of the Franciscan mendicant order. Saint Francis, he lived in the 13th century, in the early 13th century. He was born, he's an historical person, he was born of wealthy parents, but then as a young man, he left his old life behind him and chose to become a beggar and an itinerant preacher. So he walked around in Italy preaching. He attracted followers, and in 1210 he obtained permission from the Pope to found a new religious order, the Franciscan order, where the brothers, or the friars as they are also called, lived a simple life of poverty and preaching. And Saint Francis himself, the founder of this Franciscan mendicant order, he experienced the extreme consequences of this pious empathy with Christ that is characteristic of the religious spiritual climate of the 13th, 14th centuries. According to his legend, Saint Francis was fasting and praying on the mountainside in 1224. The legend is quite specific. And while he was doing this, he suddenly had a vision of a seraph, which is a six-winged angel. And this seraph gave him the 5 wounds of Christ. So he was stigmatized. Christ's wounds in the hands and the feet and the side of Christ, they pierced Francis' hands and feet and side. And these wounds wouldn't heal, and he still carried them when he died. He died only 2 years after this vision in 1224. And he very soon became venerated as a saint. This altarpiece is made only 11 years actually after he died in 1235 by an artist whose name is Bonaventura Berlinghieri. In this case, we have the name of the artist. The altarpiece features Saint Francis himself in the center, and on both sides there are episodes, scenes from his life, including the stigmatization. And we clearly see the wounds in Saint Francis's hands and feet, the stigmatization wounds. Now, the Italian peninsula wasn't part of the Byzantine Empire. It hadn't been for many centuries. Nevertheless, Italian artists, such as this Bonaventura Berlinghieri, Italian artists, painters, were trained in the Byzantine tradition. So artistically, culturally, they continued to cultivate the connections to the Byzantine culture. If you compare the grave, motionless, otherworldly facial features of St. Francis with the physiognomy of the Greek holy man Neophytus on the walls of Neophytus' hermitage or refuge on the island of Cyprus, to me they look almost like brothers. They are so very similar in expression, these longish, grave faces with their eyes staring, non-seeing into the higher spheres of supernatural reality. And Cyprus, the island Cyprus, just outside the coast of Turkey, it had been part of Byzantium. It was part of East Roman Empire ever since the two parts of the ancient Roman Empire were split in the 3rd and 4th centuries. Cyprus then fell to the East Roman half, which wouldn't last because in 1191, just a few years after the wall paintings in the hermitage of Neophytus were executed, in 1191, the island Cyprus was conquered by the English king Richard the Lionheart, and it remained in Western dominion after that. But the local culture on Cyprus retained its Byzantine flavor for centuries to come. There are 2 layers of decoration in the cave or the hermitage of Neophytus. The earlier layer, which you see in a detail of here, as I said, were made just a few years before this shift from East Roman to Western Latin authority. And this Neophytus, he was a deeply religious man, same as Francis had been. He sought solitude. He withdrew from the tumultuous world to a cave on Cyprus, where he lived for over 50 years in this cave. And as it often happens, he was very soon considered a saintly man, a holy man, and followers came to stay by the cave, and this developed into a monastery for 18 monks. And there was a chapel used by the monks in this monastery next to the Neophytus's cell, and there was even an opening, a small chamber above the chapel where Neophytus himself could sit all by himself and look down, participate in the liturgy that was carried out beneath him. And the walls of the chapel and also of Neophytus's cell are covered by paintings that are remarkably well preserved. There are biblical scenes, obviously, but there are also several depictions of this holy man, Neophytus himself. And there you have it in the textbook. I couldn't find a good online photo, so I can't show it, but there is one fresco or mural where Neophytus is kneeling on his knees, venerating or worshipping Christ and Mary and John the Baptist. And there is another painting where he is shown being escorted, lifted up to heaven by angels to witness Christ's ascension, as if Neophytus had actually himself been present when this miraculous event happened. So he kind of places himself in the company of these holy figures. There is even a painting on the wall above his tomb, which he had arranged before he died. There is a painting where Christ himself holds a scroll, and there has been a text that has now been obliterated on the scroll where Christ addresses Neophytus directly, and Christ tells Neophytus that Christ has been moved by Neophytus' prayers and grants him remission of his sins. And that is going quite far, I would say, making claims that Christ kind of in advance has granted you remission of your sins. And these are 2 icons, 2 Byzantine Greek paintings, panel paintings that are contemporary with the Neophytus frescoes on Cyprus. And the expression here in these two paintings, they encourage a similar desire to forge effective and personal ties to the saintly persons. When you stand before, or when you gaze at these icons, they encourage you to invest emotionally in your appeal to, in this case, the Virgin Mary and Christ, the dead or dying Christ himself. Both paintings radiate a very intense, a quiet but intensely emotional appeal to the beholder. They are, in fact, two sides of the same panel, the front side and the back side, or vice versa. So on to the left, there is a very sad, troubled Virgin Mary. She gestures towards the Christ child that she is holding because she foresees his death on the cross. That's why she looks so sad and sorrowful. And then on the other side, this has happened. It's the dead or the almost dead Christ that we see. And both figures are pushed to the front of the picture plane, Christ in particular. So when you stand in front of this icon, you almost share the same space as these saintly figures find themselves in. And it may seem odd to paint an icon on both sides, but this is because it was meant to be carried around on the streets of the city in processions. I've said that before, the Orthodox East Byzantine, East Roman understanding is that an icon, a painted image of a saint, partakes of the presence of the holy person it shows. So it's not just any painting. When this double icon was carried in procession, it was not just a mere image that was moving around among the people in the city. The image or the icons have a share in the presence of Christ and Mary, and the icons serve to transport this presence to wherever the icon is taken. Now, before I wrap up, I will take a brief look at art and architecture from the Islamic world in the 13th century. As always, there is much more to say, but there is no time really to do that. I think this recording is long enough as it is, probably. So I will limit myself to two architectural complexes that are both located in present-day Turkey. The first is the one you see here. It's the Sultan Han Caravanserai in Konya in Anatolia, which is in Turkey. And the caravanserai is a place to stop for caravans, for long-haul travelers, where they can lodge and rest. And this was just one of several such sarais. It was the largest sarai in the Rum Seljuk realm. The Seljuks, the Seljuk Turks, they were a people of Turkish origin. They migrated to Persia in the 11th century, and they established the Great Seljuk Empire that spanned from Turkey to Central Asia and all the way to the borders of China and India. And in 1055, the Seljuks invaded Baghdad and removed the ruling dynasty there, the Buyid dynasty, from power and took over the leadership of the Abbasid Caliphate. But the Caliph remained still in power, at least nominally in power. So the Caliphate remained, but the rulers were now the Seljuks that replaced the Buyid dynasty. And there were a number of regional rules or dominions within this great Seljuk empire that were ruled over by sub-branches of this Seljuk dynasty. One of these was the Rum Seljuk Sultanate in Anatolia, present-day Anatolia. It existed from 1071, and it withdrew from the main Seljuk Empire in 1076. It reached the height of its power in the 12th and 13th century, whereas the power of the Great Seljuk Empire, it declined in the course of the 12th century, and it finally collapsed in 1194. The Rum Seljuks continued to prosper for another 100 years, 150 years. They created a whole network of sarais, of caravan sarais, lodgings that offered shelter and protection to merchants who traveled between the cities of this empire. So the Sultan Han Sarai was located at the heart of the main caravan road, and that was the most important trade route or trade network of the empire. So this was a very busy road from antiquity. It was heavily used by the Seljuks, and they built a number of sarais, caravan sarais, along this trade route or trade route. About around 250 such sarais are known to have existed. They were positioned along the route at intervals that corresponded to the amount of distance a caravan might travel in a day. And this Sultan Han, the largest of them all, the Sultan Han Caravanserai, it consists of an open courtyard with a freestanding mosque in the center. Looks like this. And on 3 sides are sleeping quarters for the travelers. On the 2nd floor, above the stables, and then on the 4th side is a hippo-style hall for shelter if the weather is too bad. And also there is this monumental entrance that's called a pishtak. A pishtak, a 30-meter high pishtak, monumental gateway. A pishtak consists of a pointed arch and it is framed by a Muqarnas vault. I spoke of the Muqarnas vault in the class of previous week, I think. This Islamic speciality that can be used to great effect, creating spectacular visual effects. And in this case, the pishtak with its Muqarnas vault is also decorated with vertical bands of lace-like patterns and columns with deep grooves running in zigzag along the shafts. Looking like this close up. Now, in the first class of this course, when we began in early September, I spoke quite passionately, I think, of the art and architecture as history in material form. So artworks and monuments are physical remains of a past that has survived to the present. And the Sultan Han Caravanserai is very much a manifestation of this. It materializes the mercantile infrastructure and the economic and political system of the Seljuk society. And it is at the same time an expression of these systems and structures as integral to the power and the authority of the ruler, the Sultan. So this Caravanserai, Sultan Han Sarai, is a utilitarian building, but it's also a conspicuous manifestation of the Sultan's political and economic and social position. It all comes together in this monumental structure. This is another example. To the left is a photo that I showed a couple of weeks ago of yet a monumental gateway, a portal of Al-Hahim's mosque in Cairo, which was the first of its kind then when it was built. To the right is a later counterpart. Corresponding kind of structure is the north portal of a mosque and hospital in Divrigi, which is also in present-day Turkey. And it was founded, this mosque and hospital in Divrigi, it was founded in the same year, which is 1229, that the rulers of the Anatolian Mengüyeki dynasty recognized the Rum Seljuks as their overlords. The Mengüyeki dynasty were rulers in the region which had the Divrigi as its capital. And in 1229, they accepted the overlordship or the authority of the Rum Seljuk Sultanate. So technically, this this gateway, this mosque and hospital complex, is part of the Rum Seljuk heritage. This is what it looks like today. On the gateway or the portal, there is ornamentation absolutely everywhere. Yeah, this is a close-up. The decoration on the portal here is made up of ribbons and medallions and panels with stylized vegetative foliage and geometric interlacing. And it doesn't relate to the underlying architectural structure. It doesn't enhance the structural principles of the architecture beneath it. It looks rather as if it is pasted onto it. It looks like calligraphy and decorative ornamentation from a book page that has been projected onto the wall from a book. The decoration is carved in high relief, but it's completely flat, so it makes the element look like cutouts. And in fact, the author of the textbook, Caskey Cowan Saffron, tells us that the designs of the decoration were worked out on paper before being transferred to stone. There are incised guidelines that are still visible that guided the sculptors when they executed the decoration after the designs that had been previously drawn on paper. And the interior of the mosque in this mosque hospital complex is also breathtaking. There are 19 vaults in the mosque that are all different design. This is the ante mihrab vault or dome in front of the mihrab. It's just amazing. I don't really think that I have the vocabulary or the words to describe the design of it. And then on the lower part of the floor plan is the hospital that was also part of this complex. It had a separate entrance, and there were complicated vaults also in the hospital part of the structure. And there were rooms for treatment and also for teaching. Islam is a religion that places a strong emphasis on caring for the sick. To care for the sick is a virtuous and a rewarding act. It's an important part of the responsibility of the individual towards the welfare of the community, which is manifested in this combination of a mosque and a hospital in this complex in Divriji. So it's an example of a kind of Islamic multi-purpose architecture, and we'll see a couple of more such examples next week. And to me, as an art historian, these kinds of structures are very attractive because they reflect the compound nature of the society they are part of. They combine spaces for religious worship and treatment of the sick, and they tell us that these things did not belong to different sectors of life. In the Divriji complex, they appear in one and the same setting. And to care for the sick in Islamic spirituality is an act of a pious act directed towards God. So that's an aspect of medieval Islamic culture that is, I think, appealing, attractive. A less attractive aspect of medieval Islamic culture is represented in this book painting. It will be my last slide. It shows a scene from a slave market. And slavery was a widespread practice throughout the entire Middle Ages, not only on Muslim territory, but also in Europe, in fact. Christianity forbade the enslaving of other Christians. So slaves in Christian Europe then belonged to other ethnic groups and followed other religions because that was not forbidden, at least in theory. This is an Islamic slave market. The miniature, or the book in which the miniature is found, was produced in Baghdad, probably, by an artist. I don't know if I can pronounce this. Yahya ibn Mahmud al-Wasiti is the painter who has created this miniature belonging to a story about Abu Zaid, who is the hero, a trickster of the story. This Abu Zaid, he offers to a slave merchant to sell his own son as a slave. So it's Abu Zaid and the son, lower left. But this is just a trick because the son is born free. So Islam doesn't allow the selling of a freeborn person as a slave. In this miniature, the real slaves who are unfree, they are the dark-skinned persons in the lower part of the image. And we see above them how two merchants are finishing the transaction. They are weighing coins on a scale as part of the selling and buying of these dark-skinned slaves. So this is a tale, obviously. It's not a kind of a journalistic report from a specific existing slave market, but it reveals, it's an historical source that tells us that lived experience in the Islamic world included buying and selling of people from different backgrounds. And the Kasky, Cohen, Safran authors of your book, they highlight that slave markets were a negative manifestation of the increasingly affluent, urban, and interconnected medieval world. So the title of this lecture has been Town Life, Universities, and Commerce, Art in a New Era, which sounds very kind of optimistic and future-oriented and progressive. But slavery and slave markets is the dark side or the backside, one of the backsides or negative manifestations of this growing interconnectedness of the medieval world. So this was my last image. I will now conclude this lecture.